So with the get the spindle back together for the M head, and I'm just waiting on some timing. I got a couple other projects on the go, so I'm waiting on some time to start. I want to sand down the housing and paint it and stuff. So in the meantime, I've got a little bit of spare time right now. So the other thing I wanted to do with this is get this pulley apart. Doesn't sound so good. And so it looks pretty simple in there. There's the spindle hub, a couple of bearings, there's a bearing housing, and then a retainer nut on the bottom. So that's 1.25 inches, and that's the spindle hub. And then down inside there, it's just a retainer nut and a cage there. So I should be able to just pull that apart and knock that hub out, because there's no way to get the pulley out without pulling the spindle hub up through it. That's my story anyways. This is the bearing housing out of the pulley assembly, where the belt housing, and this is the two bearings for the step pulley that runs the this would be the one that runs the spindle. And so there's 6 bolts. This is from the bottom. If you were to take it off the spindle, this is what you would see in here. Anyways, I was ready for quite a fight. I had it set up in a vise, put these bolts in, getting ready to crank this locking nut here, and it was pretty much hand tight. I didn't have to hardly move it at all. This this top bearing's not too bad. This would be the higher one, but this one here, this bottom one, is just locked up almost solid. So anyways, at this point I'm going to press the bearings out. They'll go out this way, and then we'll see whether we can save the bearings or not. Slight change in plans on the M head. Really the purpose of taking it apart was to kind of have a look at the bearings and things. I've got a friend who needs some help with some of them. He's got multiple M heads that he's working on a project with them, so it was just more of a tear it down and understand it. I'm not going to go through the trouble of you know, paint and Bondo and stuff on this. I've already got one big project on the go. I don't need to be tearing into something else like that. So just going to reassemble at this point. Everything's been cleaned up. Recall I scraped this surface in here, got a nice surface there. So now I'm just going to start working on putting it back together. And this is the skirt that goes in. Goes in here, and it comes down, and it should be exposed in the opening here in the slot. And then the spindle unit, I'm going to just put a little bit of oil on that. And the rack here has to go to the bottom. I'm not sure if you can see it in there, but the rack's exposed now inside of there. So the next thing that goes back in is the pinion, which has a couple of things going on here. We've got actually goes in this way. We've got this here, which lines up through this bore here, and this is the fine feed. There's a split bushing here, and that split bushing goes in this side here where the clock spring goes in for the handle. And then this here goes all the way through the middle, and there's a key that drives this. So what happens is, when you're using the quill, you're running the rack and the pinion, and then this knob goes all the way through, and when you tighten this up, there's a couple of fiber washers on either side of this gear here. And so what happens is then you can use the fine feed handle to run the quill up and down. And then there's a pocket here that lines up for a set screw from the back side here. I'm going to put a little oil in this split bushing. And we should be able to just line up the rack and pinion here. And if you were paying attention, you would have noticed that this has got to come in from the other side. Which means this has got to be in place before the spindle. So I'm just looking down here to make sure that that pocket in the split bushing is lined up, and then I got to get a set screw in there. So now we got to put the fiber washers in. And we got a little Woodruff keys got to go in there. Got a makeshift hammer here. I just want to make sure that leading edge is low enough to get this started. I'm going to oil that up a bit. So now that we've got the rack and pinion engaged, this should we got to get the handle for that. I'm going to get this thing mounted. It's a little awkward to work with. So I've got it mounted on one of the M-head adapter brackets, and Quill's working good there. So the next step is now to get the actually, I think I've got to get this depth adjustment set up in here, because I need to, once you set up the spring, it's going to want to return, and you have to have a positive stop for that return. And that system's pretty straightforward. We've got this guy here's got to go in there. And then I've got to get this apart and put it together as you assemble it here. One size bigger. And these guys will only go one way. So what happens is you got to feed the screw through, and then you got to put everything back on it while it's in there. And you can slide that up into the stop. And then this this end of the screw here, I just put a little bit of lube, although this doesn't rotate once it's assembled. And then what happens is there's a larger thread here on this bottom piece, and then you got to screw that in. And then there's a set screw here, and that just holds it from rotating, I believe. And there we go. So the next thing I'm going to put in is the quill lock here. And when you tighten those two up, that just wedges up against the quill. It's lining up pretty good. And then I don't have a handle for it, but it's a fine thread. I'm gonna have to make up a handle. The good news is it's lining up right. I don't have much leverage there, I just got a little screw in there right now. But it's locking up for sure. So that, we just have to make a handle for it. I actually ended up switching, and I hooked the outer diameter clip first, and then I just coiled the spring up, and now it is not hooked into the center, and I'm just going to turn the quill. So I'm turning the quill, and I got a screwdriver. I'm just trying to get it to lock in. to the inner clip, or slot I should say. Now I think I just found a mistake in my assembly order here. I think I've got to have the quill out in order to use the pinion gear to wind up the spring. So now with the inner clip hooked, you can extend the quill out. The spring is coiling up, and then the rack, or the pinion gear, comes loose from the rack when the quill goes out, the spindle goes out far enough, and then you can add spring tension. So it's coiling up right now, and then you bring the rack of the spindle back in and engage it. And so I'm letting go of the handle right now. So I think I'm going to try and get one more revolution out of it. That's probably far enough. So now I'm going to let go of the handle. So I'm pretty happy with that there. I'm going to leave that adjusted the way it is. So now with the spring all coiled up in there, next is the retainer cover. And then that's the knurled knob for locking up the fine feed. So now I've got to put back together the adjusting stop system, and then the only thing left after that is the fine feed handle. So the fine feed handle is just a worm gear here, which engages with the one on the quill pinion. And then there's a bushing here, which has got a groove in it for a pin that holds that orientation. And then of course the handle, which engages to rotate, or it can freewheel. I'm hoping And if I lock this up, see if we can actually use the handle to drive the gear together. And it's actually working. I just hope the pins lined up. And I think we got lucky. So with the handle installed and the knurled knob tightened up, you can use the fine feed to advance the spindle. And then if you've got it loose, with the regular quill handle on there, so normal operation, the handle's not turning. And then when you tighten up the clutch system, the fine feed handle will run the quill up and down. And that's pretty much it to put the head together. It's a lot simpler than a J head. There's no gearing, no auto feed or anything like that, so pretty simple.